All right. Good evening. It's not raining, is it? Is that what that is, Ali? Great day. Okay. Encouragement to lead. That's what this lesson is going to be about. But before I do that, please bear with me as I share with you just a little bit of reality that, sometimes reality just really bites. So there's certain studies out there. Now, this is in the business world. Certain studies are showing that a huge leadership gap is starting to open up in the business world. There are thousands upon thousands of baby boomers who are retiring every single day, and their spots are not being filled. Who is taking all of their spots? The next generation is supposed to be doing it. That's the natural progression, right? It's the natural way things should go. The next generation picks up where the previous one left off. Those are the millennials. But the problem is that over 60% of them millennials now believe that they lack the leadership skills needed to succeed. So 40% feel like they can do it. That's great. At least it's not 10% or 4%. But 60% of the millennial generation believe that they lack the leadership skills needed to succeed. That's a big problem. And that's a problem that you're probably thinking, well, who cares? It's another stat that's not really going to bother me. This is a problem that will affect you in the long run. And what's going to happen is what people always do is blame some person or some group, probably some guy who sits at the White House. They're going to blame that person or their administration or their mayor or their governor for all their woes. But that's the business, that's the economic world. What about the church? We want to know about the church. Well, the church really is in some ways in the same predicament. Christians pass away every day. Some of them are leaders. Many of them are servants. And so who is taking their spots? Who's filling their shoes? Who is stepping up? Obviously, it's going to have to be the next generation, right? We say, well, the next generation is, right? Well, yes and no. Yes and no. I don't have a poll. I don't have the statistics for this. So we're just going to have to ask the question out loud. How many of our young people today, we're going to go from, let's say, age 15 or so to age 35. How many within that group believe they lack the spiritual leadership skills that the Lord's church needs today? What do you think that number is? I really don't have a number, but what do you think that number might be? I don't think we need to ask that question about the older generation, about how many believe that they lack the leadership skills needed. And why I don't think we need to ask that is, I think, because the answer is so painfully obvious. As I visit local congregations, and I'm not traveling the world, I don't do that, I don't really care to do that. I'm not traveling the country, speaking at all these prestigious places, but I've been around a little bit, and I have visited congregations out west. Not many, but some. But I speak with local congregations, and I know preachers from this area and from other areas, and I talk to other Christians, and I talk to other elders from all over, in and out of the state, and we talk about how the church is doing. We ask each other, how's the congregation doing? How's your congregation doing? And I think what we have found is that it's very clear there's a leadership gap. There's a leadership gap. I'm not going to say, we're not going to point the finger at which generation it was, because it's probably one or two, maybe even three generations in the church. There are exceptions, of course, that those generations, whoever they are, have really dropped the ball when it comes to keeping God in the home and raising up faithful servants to Christ who actually care about serving. And that's where we are. So so now the question is, well, what do you do about it? I don't know, really. I don't think there is a switch to flip on or a pill to take and it's going to make everything's going to be okay. I think that's a very hard question about what we do about it. Because the church in some places have been so narrow-minded on what leadership is and so narrow-minded upon what evangelism is that it's almost as if our consciences have been seared with a hot iron. Baptizing family members seems to have taken the priority over everything else. And we think, well, as long as we baptize the children, then we're growing. That's not how you grow the church. That's not how we grow in the church. That's called church. That's not church growth. That's church swelling. Have y'all heard that before? That's the church swelling. And what happens? Well, eventually swelling goes away. Unless you die from it. And when we're not teaching the importance of involvement, church involvement, and church and leadership within the church, when a generation or two or three fails to do that, you have issued a death sentence to the Lord's church. Not universally, because the Lord's church is going to be somewhere in the world until Christ comes back. But locally, that's a death sentence to the church. So what do? Start over? Do we just start over? We just start over? Maybe we do. Maybe we do just start over. In a way, I think we got to start over. We have really got to change the way we're raising up our Christian families. Can't do it like we once did. We ought to be doing it the way we ought to be doing it. We got to be stressing leadership. The next generation shouldn't hear leadership talks and lectures from the preacher on Sundays. They should hear it in the home. They should hear it in the home and serving in the home and involvement. And of course, the church leadership that's in existence needs to be pushing that, along with everything else that leadership should be talking about. Now, you might hear that, well, what are we going to do? Just start over? Well, what are we supposed to do in the meantime? It's going to take years for the next generation to get to where they can be serving and where they can be leaders and step into these very important roles. And that's true. And so what do we do in the meantime? I think we're in survival mode. Unfortunately, we got to endure. The church is going to have to endure. And the burden is going to be very heavy on the individuals and the families who realize what I am talking about right now. And it's going to be very heavy on the individuals and the families who are willing to step up and take on perhaps a greater load that the few generations before never had to really take on, because everybody was doing something and everybody as they should have been doing. So we're just going to have to endure until we can get back to the church, back to where it ought to be. And for some Christians, it's going to be too much. It's going to be too much. Because it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. It's going to be too much. Christians are going to fall away in the meantime. For some congregations, it's going to be too much. Go within a 50-mile radius of this spot right here, and you will see that it's been too much for congregations to bear. Because they ain't there no more. Or they are about to not be there anymore. But the church is going to have to endure. It's going to take strong faith. I'm telling you right now, it's going to take strong faith. And those of you who realize what I'm saying, I'm trying to reach you to let you know that if your faith is, something's going on with your faith, fix it. Because you're not going to make it. Then this congregation is not going to make it. Strong faith, brethren, and we got to do it together. Don't worry about your past and all your mistakes and all your regrets. I'm not talking about this to get you to dwell on how whatever mistakes you may have made. It's forgetting those things which are behind and looking forward to those things which are ahead. Philippians 3. All that really wasn't the encouraging part of the lesson. That was just the reality of what we're dealing with. And listen to me. You have got to say, did I err in anything that I said? Reality is, it's hard to take a bite out of sometimes. But man, if we don't recognize it, what it is, and if we want things to just keep on going as they do, and I'm not saying we're a dead church, I'm not saying we're a dead congregation, I'm not saying that about the area congregations, I'm not saying about the church in Tennessee and the church in America. And I'm just saying something's got to change and we got to be doing better. So with all that said, I do want to give some encouragement to the people who agree with what I'm saying tonight. No matter what your age is, but I really want to talk, and I had the graduation thing in mind. I really want to talk to our young people, male and female, because what I'm talking about leading is not really just about preaching, and I don't want to think that the young ladies or the women here that, well, we don't really lead or we don't really serve. You do. You are extremely important. The church can't survive without you. So this is not just about getting up in the pulpit and preaching or getting up and saying a public prayer or publicly serving in some way, okay? This is to you who know how important leadership is, and serving is, and involvement is, and this is just to give you a little oomph, if that's what you need, so you can push ahead. So here's what we're going to quickly look at how God responded to Moses when Moses was asked to lead. And I know Brother Danny talked about Moses not too long ago. I don't think I'm going to be repeating any great points that he made. I don't think this is not going to be a repeat. So here's number one. This is your encouragement. I want you to remember that God is with you. Is that a lame point? No, I don't think it's a lame point. I think we forget this. Exodus chapter 3 and verse 12, Moses gives an excuse. And I don't care about his excuses right now. I care about what God said to him. So he gives the excuse. And God tells him, basically, Moses, you don't have to worry about a thing. Exodus 3:12, so he said, God said to Moses, I will certainly be with you. And this shall be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, here's the sign. You shall serve God on this mountain that they were standing on. So God says, Moses, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go down into Egypt with you. And when you go before the people, and it's going to be scary. Oh, you're going to be shaking your boots. You're going to be nervous. Your hands are going to be shaking. But he says, I'm going to be there. God says, I'm going to be there when that happens to you. And when you go before Pharaoh and you're even more scared, I'm going to be there for you. And when you're walking out of that place, out of bondage into your freedom, God's telling Moses, I'm going to be right there. I'm going to be right there with you. So God was present with Moses, and I want you to be convinced that God is present with you as you go and you do things for the Lord, and as you serve and as you lead. Now, the sign was that God was indeed going to be present with him, that when Moses had finally led the people out, they were going to come to the very mountain that day that God was talking to him on. And we fast forward into the Exodus narrative until we get to Mount Sinai. Very familiar mountain, right? Well, they were talking on Mount Horeb. Well, Horeb is the mountain range. Sinai is in that range, a peak within that range, okay? So they're in the same place. Moses goes up on that peak. He stays there how long? 40 days and how many nights? 40 nights, Exodus 24. We know God gave Moses the law there, but do you think it took all 40 days to do that? God, I mean, what is your typing speed, God? 40 days and 40 nights? I think it probably didn't take that long. So what do you think God was and Moses were talking about that whole time? Perhaps I'd like to think that God was reaffirming his promise. Maybe God's saying something like, Moses, you see, told you I was going to be with you. Look where you are now. Didn't I tell you that my sign, that I was going to be with you, and the sign was going to be, you're going to be right back on this mountain, and I'm going to be with you? And where are you at? You're on this mountain. So what's that mean? I was with you the whole time. With you the whole time. And Moses could look back at those things, and he could say, yeah, you know what, God? You were right. You were with me. So part of being Christian leaders is leading people to Christ. Yes? It's leading people to Christ. That's part of Christian leadership. And it's a work that's done outside of the building. Outside of the building. There needs to be work done. Of course, we want our children and our grandchildren and whoever else that we may be under our care. Yes, we work with them and we want them to obey the gospel. But we got to get outside the building. We want to be growing and not swelling. What was the last thing Jesus told his disciples? Y'all all know this. The last thing that Jesus told his disciples when he gave them the command to go out and bring people to him. What did he say? And lo, I am with you always. And we don't believe that? That's Matthew 28:20. We don't believe that? And we don't believe that Christ can help us do and bring people to Christ, and it can help us when we're scared to lead and scared to serve and scared to do something that we might have never done before. Christ said, I'm going to be with you always. Same thing God said to Moses on the mountain. Go and lead, and I'm going to be with you. Listen to Acts 14:27. Now when they had come and gathered the church together, they reported all that God had done with them. God was with them. Right? And that God had opened the door of the faith to the Gentiles. Door of faith to the Gentiles. Acts 15 in verse 4. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and the elders, and they reported all the things that God had done with them. Acts 15:12. Then all the multitude kept silent and listened to Barnabas and Paul, declaring how many miracles and wonders God had worked through them among the Gentiles. Folks, it's pretty clear that the early church had a very clear understanding that God was with them in the things that they were doing for the church. They got it. They believed it. And that's why they were able to do the amazing things that we see the church doing there. It wasn't just because they had all the miracles. Well, we don't have what they have. You got the same God, don't you? And they didn't have this, did they? But you do. And so we want to have the same understanding. I want you to have the same understanding. So you too, like Moses, can look back on things and say, you know what? God was right. God was right. He was with me, and I could do this. You need to remember you're in a partnership with God. Exodus 3 and verse 14, God tells Moses that God, is doing all of this, and Moses is really just the tool. And God said to Moses, here's that famous I am statement. I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the children of Israel, I am has sent me to you. Now there's a lot in that statement, right? And one of those things within that statement is God can do whatever he wants to do. God is able to do what he wants to do. He wants something done, God will get it done. He is not like one of the cheap, fake, weak Egyptian gods that only existed in myth and legends and probably sat on a shelf somewhere and did nothing at all day long. Notice, if you're there in Exodus 3, verse 17, there's an I will statement, and I have said, I will. You see the emphasis there of how he's going to get something done? I will bring you up out of the affliction of Egypt. Verse 20, so I will stretch out my hand and strike Egypt with all my wonders, which I will do in its midst. God's letting Moses, he's saying, son, you know it's going to be me doing all of this, but I'm going to do it all through you. I'll do it all through you. Let me ask you this. Did God need Moses to do these great things? He did not need Moses. Does he need you to do great things? He doesn't. He don't need me. But does he want you to be involved? Does he want you to be involved? Does he want to share this great thing with you? Yes. Yes, he does. Every single one of you, he wants you to be involved. It's a partnership. So we can say God's working with us, but let's not forget that we are working with God as well. That goes both ways. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 6, God gave the growth, and he will always give the growth. But who planted and who watered Paul and Apollos? God can't give the growth if his people do not plant and water. You see how they kind of work together? It's a partnership about bringing people to Christ. This is about evangelism, really, which, of course, we need to do more of that, me included. But let this make sense to you in the area of just serving and leading in the church itself. 1 Corinthians 3 and verse 9, for we are God's fellow workers. We're his fellow workers. Partnership. 2 Corinthians 6 and verse 1, we're workers together with him. He's not like he just sent us on. He gave us a little bit of a training. We got to watch a training video, and then he just sends us out into the work field. Workers together with him. It's a partnership. In Mark's account of the Great Commission, he says they went out and they preached everywhere, the Lord working with them. The Lord was with them, working with them. Mark 16 and verse 20. So we have a partnership with God. And if your partner is God, if God is your partner, why are you so afraid of setting your goals high? Please believe me that you can do things, serve, lead, be involved, talk with people about the Bible. You can do things that maybe right now you think you cannot. I don't care if anyone has ever believed in you your whole life. Who cares what they say? You can do things with God's help. And God's saying, I'm just waiting for you to make the move. You got a big God. How big is your God? You want to put him down like this? You want to put him like this? You want to put him like this? What is it? How big do you think your God is? I would have to say that you would say it's pretty big. And so if you got a big God, why doesn't that allow for big goals to be set? Right? Last one. Newsflash, God made you. Did y'all know that? God made you. I know your mommy and daddy were involved, but God made you. Now I want you to see the power of God in this. So in Exodus chapter 4, verse 1, Moses gives his excuse. And then in verses 3 through 9, we read of God giving Moses 3 signs or 3 miracles that was given to him so he could go into Egypt and use these things. The first one was his rod becoming a serpent, right? The rod would turn to a serpent, and then poof, it'd go right back to a rod. Wow, that's amazing. I wonder what that looked like. The second was his hand becoming leprous, right? And then his hand would go back to normal again. And then the third was taking some river out of the water. How about some water out of the river, and they would turn that water into blood? Verse number 9 of Exodus 4. So he gives them three. He equips them with 3 things. Verse 10, what do you see there if you got it open? Another excuse that Moses gives. Bam! And then God responds. Verse 11, so the Lord said to him, who has made man's mouth? Or who makes the mute, the deaf, the seeing, or the blind? Have not I, the Lord? Verse 12, now therefore go, and I will be with your mouth and teach you what you shall say. Remind yourself that God made you, and he will teach you all that you need to know if you are up for it. You got to be up for it. And so what we've seen in verses 3 through 12 of Exodus 4 is that God gave Moses all the tools he needed to carry out his mission. He gave him everything he needed. And we might even say that God even gave Moses his own brother to help him in his mission. You think about that. So you are unique. You are unique. You are worth something. You are worth a whole lot. And God has given you tools. He's given you abilities. He's given you your personality. He's given you talents. And he's made you with these things so you can use them to glorify him, to serve, and to lead. You can do things. Now tell me I'm wrong. You can do things that no one else can do. You say, well, yeah, some people can do what I do. Not exactly like you can do it. No. You can do things that no one else can do because no one can do it exactly like you. You're unique. You have relationships with certain people that other people do not have. That makes you important. You can talk to people like no one else can. Surely you go out and surely you talk to people. You know people. You have friends outside this building. You know people. And you talk to them. You can talk to people like nobody else can. I can't go and talk to the same person just like you can. I can't do that. Because you do it in your own way. You are unique and you are worth something because God made you that way. Don't you see the importance? You see what I'm getting at here? Now, how can you know this is true? Well, I don't really feel important. In the book of Jeremiah, chapter 1 and verse 5, God says this, before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. Before you were born, I sanctified you. I ordained you a prophet to the nations. You know why he was saying this? Because Jeremiah was kind of like, prophet, I don't know. Jeremiah was hesitant to be a prophet. God is saying, no, hold up, buddy. You forgot that it's in you to do this. It's in you to be this. I'm calling you. I wouldn't call you if you didn't have it in you. Over in the New Testament, the book of Galatians, chapter 1 and verse 15, Paul wrote that God had separated him from his mother's womb and called him as an apostle through his grace. So God had plans for Jeremiah, he and Paul before they were ever even born. That's pretty amazing to think about. And so there was a day in Paul's life, there was a day coming where God was going to confront Paul, and we can read about that 3 times in the book of Acts. And that day he was going to be confronted by God, and God was going to challenge him to live up to how God had made him. Why wouldn't that be true that God does that with every one of us? That there's a day where we're going to be challenged to be the kind of Christians and servants that God wants us to be. Now, whether that day has passed for you, or it's yet to come, or it's like right now, I want to encourage you to be willing to step up to the challenge. Because otherwise, you're wasting everything that God gave you when He made you. Will you be who God made you to be? Will you do it? God is said to thoroughly equip us for every good work. That's 2 Timothy 3 and verse 17. Now, that's talking about the inspired scriptures, the God-breathed scriptures. But I'd also say that He does that. He equips us by how He made each one of us. And when all the members of Christ's body, of the church, are using all of their skills and all of their talents and abilities, and we pull them all together as God intended the church to do, then, boy, you better, not say better, watch out. And if the church worldwide would just do that, the church of Christ would be a pretty formidable force in the world. If you find yourself asking, well, how can I figure all this out then? I mean, I see what you're saying, but how can I figure all this out? I don't really know exactly how God made me. Like, what? Like, how do you do that? It's a little confusing. Here, just ask yourself, what do I really like to do? Obviously, if it's something sinful, we cut it out. But what do I really like to do? And what do I do really well? What do I feel like I'm really good at? And then you ask yourself, now how can I use those things to glorify my God? Have you even tried to ask and answer any of those questions? And how do you know what you're made of? How do you know that you can't serve? How do you know you can't lead? How do you know you can't do something more? I suspect that there are many, many things that all of us in here like to do, and you do them well, and that you are able to glorify God in some way with those things. So why are you not doing that? You can lead, you can serve, and you can do things for the Lord and His church. Why? Well, and these aren't my opinions. These are not my opinions. This is true. These things are true. Because God is with you. Because you have a partnership with God, the God of the universe. And because God created you unique. And He gave you all the great things that make you you. So that you can turn around and do great things for Him. Appreciate your attention. And I hope you take this to heart. And I would love to talk to you about it, or I would love to just listen to you. Anything you have to say along these lines. You need to obey the gospel to be a Christian. And if you haven't done that, then I hope you would do that. Consider it. Sit down studying the Bible. If you're here as a member of the Lord's church and you have not been using the things that God gave you the way that you could have been for so long, then I hope, I'm not asking you to come forward, but I am asking you to change, because this congregation needs you. It's not about your money, what you put in the basket. It's not about that. We could fill these plates up with money and never serve, never be involved, never lift another finger. In this congregation, we will die. We will die. If there's something that needs to be changed in your life, I hope you would. If you're struggling, if your faith is not as strong as you want it to be, then I just want you to know that I'm going to pray for you. Because, yeah, I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. There are some places where, you know what? It's easy to be a Christian in some places. In some places, it is not. It is not. I'm just asking you to take what I said to heart, that's all. The invitation is open. If you need to respond in any way whatsoever, please do so. Please do so. Say something. Let's grab our songbooks and stand and sing together to encourage each other.